I ran across this 13-inch benchtop planer that has a true helical cutter head. It's only about $600 to $700, so I had to try it out. Usually with a benchtop joiner and a helical cutter head, you're going to spend $1,000 at least, maybe $1,600. I'll do a complete review of this planer, features and functions, but most importantly to see if we get that premium cut out of the helical cutter head, like I expect we will. I'll also do some comparisons to Cutech and DeWalt planers that I've reviewed in the past. So let's get started. Planer comes nearly ready to use right out of the box. Just attach the depth adjustment handle and screw on the dust collection shroud, and it's ready to go. And I do like that they give you 5 spare cutter heads. To adjust the depth of cut, you turn a crank. There isn't an initial depth indicator on this machine like there is on the Cutech and DeWalt planers, so figuring out that initial first pass depth is a little bit tricky. I'm just kind of feeling where it barely touches the front roller, and I find that many times when using this planer that my initial pass or two really doesn't cut much. I guess I'm just trying to be too cautious without an initial depth indicator to help me out. I don't want to gouge a deep initial cut. However, after the initial setting, to do multiple shallow passes, you really don't need the depth indicator anyway. I just turn the crank a quarter turn for each successive pass. Quarter turn down is 1/64th of an inch deep cut. Even though there isn't a depth of cut indicator, there is this guard to prevent too deep of a cut, which is kind of a nice feature. The depth adjustment mechanism is a chain system making use of 2 screw posts, and the carriage then rides up and down on these 4 sliding posts to hold it straight and level. This design requires a carriage lock, so with each successive pass, you need to unlock the carriage, make the depth adjustment, and then relock the carriage. If I compare that to either the DeWalt or the Cutech planers, they have 4 screw posts, one at each corner of the carriage for the depth adjustment, and this design doesn't require a carriage lock, and therefore really simplifies the process of multiple passes, not having to unlock and relock the carriage with each adjustment. Okay, so back to the FindBuyTool depth adjustment. I just wanted to make a note that sometimes it feels a bit jerky, like it's catching on something, and I noticed that the chain seems a little bit loose. So I propped it up where I could see what's happening down below while I'm adjusting the depth. And yeah, it seems like if the chain was a little tighter, there would be a little smoother depth adjustment. I really couldn't find a way to adjust the chain, and it's not affecting the quality of cut or the functionality of the planer. So let's move on. So I'm just looking to see how deep the snipe is, and it's almost non-existent. I mean, I'm sure there's something there, but it's so small, it's really difficult to either see or feel the snipe. I found this to be the case with all of these benchtop planers I've used, as long as the infeed and outfeed tables are properly adjusted. And on this planer, the tables are adjusted perfectly right out of the box. Although, if a calibration is necessary, it's a pretty easy screw adjustment to make it happen. And note, I did do a video on using planer sleds to completely eliminate snipe if you're looking for more info on that subject. Even though I don't very often use either the depth stop or the thickness gauge, it's worth taking a look to see how they work. By setting the depth stop at 3/4 of an inch, I can run a test to see how well it's calibrated out of the box with factory settings. Starting with a workpiece that's a bit thicker, I take multiple shallow passes until the depth stop prevents me from lowering the carriage any further and make a final pass at that setting. And so the actual workpiece size ends up being about 0.747, pretty close to 3/4 of an inch right out of the box. And looking at the thickness gauge, it's also showing 3/4 of an inch, and it's spot on, no adjustment necessary. I really like the fact that all of the calibration and adjustments on this machine are pre-adjusted at the factory, and you can start using it without any calibration. And if I wanted to further adjust the thickness gauge, it's pretty straightforward. And to calibrate the depth stop, there's a set screw to do that. And it's worth noting that this adjustment is much easier than on the Cutech, where the calibration screw is very difficult to get to way up inside the machine. So let's discuss cutter configuration. This planer comes with a helical cutter head with 40 carbide blades that are mounted at an angle. And this allows for a cutting or slicing action and therefore a much better quality cut than straight blades. Note that the Cutech planer is spiral, not helical. It has 26 straight blades, and the DeWalt planer has 3 straight blades. And yes, I know you can put a helical cutter head on a DeWalt planer, but that dramatically raises the cost and puts it in a different price category. So I think of straight blades as chippers and helical blades as cutters that can much better deal with work pieces with difficult grain variations. So let's try it out on this piece of curly maple. I bought this as surface two sides, but you can see that the industrial planer where this was milled couldn't deal with the grain variation. See all of the chipping? And this is very typical of what any straight blade planer would do with this type of curly grain. Okay, I'm just running it through the FindBuyTool planer, and we'll see how this helical cutter head handles this difficult curly grain. This is absolutely amazing. It may be difficult to see in the video, but the result is really a perfect cut. No tearing or chipping. So impressive. When I did the review of the Cutech and DeWalt planers, I also used a piece of curly maple as a test. And in both cases, Cutech and DeWalt, there was some tearing and chipping. It was nowhere near the quality that the FindBuyTool planer gives on work pieces with a lot of grain variation. I ran another test on the FindBuyTool, this time with a piece of rough sawn honey locust with a pretty complicated grain and some knots. Honey locust is a super hard wood. The results are really great, really good quality cut. I'll summarize the results in a minute, but first, just a note on dust collection, which is pretty important when using a planer. This FindBuyTool planer has a 2.5-inch or 4-inch dust collection port, and it works pretty good. I just have it hooked up to a really small shop vac. There are some chips, maybe 20%, that tend to blow out the front, but the majority get taken by dust collection. In my review of the DeWalt planer, I glossed over its dust chip blower feature, and man, did I hear about it in the comments. So let me say for the record that DeWalt definitely has a better dust blower, and DeWalt users are passionate about it. That being said, I wouldn't overlook the fact that the FindBuyTool planer also has a similar fan mounted to the main motor shaft that blows the chips out. The FindBuyTool configuration more blows the chips, whereas the DeWalt configuration sucks the chips out, which is a bit better. The weight of a planer is an important consideration for me since I frequently lift my planer onto my workbench to use it. The FindBuyTool planer is heavy, it's about 70 pounds, but not so heavy I can't lift it. I'm too embarrassed to show how I managed to get the DeWalt planer up onto my workbench by myself. It wasn't pretty. At nearly 100 pounds, it's not a machine I'd want to be lifting on a regular basis. Okay, just to summarize, this review video is focused on the FindBuyTool model FB131H with helical cutter head. I've made some comparisons along the way to the Cutech model 40800H 2-speed spiral benchtop planer and the DeWalt 735X 3-blade planer. I'll leave links to all three of these planers in the description. FindBuyTool planer is missing a depth of cut indicator and also has the requirement of a carriage unlock and relock with each depth adjustment, which is kind of a hassle. Also worth noting that the DeWalt and Cutech planers are both 2-speed, which allows you to slow down the feed rate for a better quality cut. But that's something that isn't really needed with the helical cutter head because it already produces a far superior quality cut, especially with difficult figured wood grains. And with all of these planers being in the same price range, it's hard to argue with the benefit of having the helical cutter head on the FindBuyTool. Thanks so much for watching, and if you think I've earned it, it'd be great if you hit that thumbs up like button and consider subscribing.